All right. Welcome to another deep dive where we deep dive into a topic and try to come away with a better understanding than when we started.
And I think we've got a really fascinating one lined up for today. We are exploring some really core concepts in business, pulling ideas and insights from the 10-day MBA, which is quite a comprehensive look at a whole range of business disciplines.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about this source is it doesn't limit itself to just, one particular area of a
Yeah.
business. It really tries to give the reader, and in our case, the listener, a solid foundation and a bunch of key topics. And we're
Yeah.
talking about marketing, ethics, accounting. There's stuff in here about organizational behavior, using quantitative analysis, finance, operations, economics, even touches on things like business strategy and law and personal finance.
I mean, this really is, it's an ambitious undertaking. The author's trying to distill what would normally be years of study into 10 days.
Yeah, and our mission here is even more focused, right? We're really targeting this deep dive at you, the learner,
Mm.
the person who wants to get a good grasp of these concepts, maybe find some of those unexpected connections between things, and really build a working knowledge of how business works without feeling like they're drowning in too much detail.
Absolutely. So we're not aiming for exhaustive coverage here, but we do want to highlight those core principles and frameworks that can really help you understand this complex world.
Yeah, and I think a great place to start is with the customer, right? I
Yeah.
mean, any business that hopes to succeed has got to figure out who they're trying to reach. So we're going to jump right into some of the fundamental ideas around consumer analysis and marketing, and the book right off the bat it emphasizes that first step of really understanding your consumer. The idea that people have all these different needs and desires, and that smart marketing starts by figuring out, okay, who are the groups of people, the segments who share some of those needs, share some of those desires, because that's where you can really start to craft a strategy that's going to resonate with them.
Yeah, I mean it's almost like if you were, trying to hit a target with an arrow, but you didn't even know what direction the target was in. You'd just be, shooting arrows randomly into the air.
Exactly. And one of the things that I really appreciate about this book is that it poses some very pointed questions right at the start of this whole section. Questions like what specific question am I trying to answer by doing this research, and how am I actually going to use this information once I have it?
Yeah.
Because it really is easy, especially if you're not, you know, deeply immersed in the marketing world. It's easy to get caught up in just gathering data for the sake of gathering data without having a real clear sense of purpose. And the book even makes the point that, there are a lot of research firms out there who are more than happy to take your money and do all sorts of studies for you, even if you haven't really thought through what you're hoping to learn from it.
Right. I mean, you can spend a lot of time and money and end up with a big pile of data that doesn't actually tell you anything useful. So having that clarity of purpose up front is really essential.
Yeah. So once you know who you're trying to reach, then the book talks about this concept of how involved is the consumer in the actual decision-making process. So it distinguishes between these two kind of extremes,
Yeah.
high involvement products versus low involvement products.
Yeah.
And the high involvement ones are the things where there's, maybe a significant financial risk or maybe some kind of personal risk.
Yeah.
Like the book gives the example of medical devices. Like pacemakers. I mean, you really want to make sure you're making the right choice there. Or things that carry a lot of social weight, like certain status symbols.
Right. And those are often the things that are, more expensive. And also where, it's harder to directly compare them, side by side. So people tend to do a lot more research before they make those kinds of purchases.
Yeah. The book gives the example of choosing a lawyer, right? I mean, if you end up in court, you don't really want to find out that you hired, the wrong lawyer. You don't get a do-over on that typically.
Right, right. It's a much higher stakes decision.
But then you have things on the other end of the spectrum, these low involvement products where the decision is much more routine, much less impactful. You're grabbing a candy bar at the checkout line. If it's not your favorite, no big deal. You can try a different one next time.
Right. It's not a life-changing decision.
Right, exactly. So the amount of research and thought that people put into these decisions is going to vary wildly depending on where they fall on that spectrum. Then the book moves on to this idea of defining your relevant market, and this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because it's not just about looking at the total sales figures for some broad product category. The book gives this really insightful example of, let's say you're trying to market Mexican gourmet ground coffee, right? And you're looking at the U.S. market, and you might see that the total coffee market in the U.S. is huge, $11 billion or something. But if you're selling your coffee through grocery stores, then a large chunk of that 11 billion is coming from institutional sales like restaurants, offices, vending machines. So your relevant market, the people who you can actually reach through grocery store channels, might only be 6.6 billion. So it's about really understanding who you can actually reach, not just the total size of the pie, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you could get really excited looking at those big numbers, but then realize that a lot of that market is not accessible to you.
Yeah, and that's a really important distinction.
It is.
Yeah, then the book introduces this concept of the product life cycle, or PLC. It's basically this idea that products go through these predictable stages,
Yeah.
from their initial launch all the way to their eventual decline in popularity.
Right. And the book focuses on the very first stage, the introduction stage, where, the product is brand new. People may not even know that it exists, let alone what it does or why they should care. So you're doing a lot of, heavy lifting in terms of just creating awareness, lots of advertising and promotion just to kind of educate the market. Distribution might be pretty limited to a few select outlets.
Yeah, and the product itself might be evolving quite rapidly as you get early customer feedback, right?
Yeah.
You might be tweaking things, changing things, really trying to find that sweet spot.
Exactly. And one of the interesting things here is that the people who are buying your product in this early stage are often the innovators and early adopters. These are the
Mhm.
folks who are, willing to take a chance on something new. They're not afraid to be the first ones on the block to try it out.
Yeah, they're the ones who line up for the new iPhone, the night before it comes out.
Exactly. And for companies that are launching really truly novel products, the book mentions things like cutting edge fashion, breakthrough drugs, new AI technologies. They face this real challenge of how to price their product because there's no established benchmarks. It's something that's never existed before. So they have to kind of figure out, okay, what's the right price point to attract those early adopters, but also to ensure that they can, continue to invest in the product and bring it to a wider market eventually.
Yeah, that's a tricky balance to strike. So once you have a sense of the product, the customer,
Yeah.
then it's time to think about the competition, right? It's not enough to just know your customer. You got to know who else is out there trying to serve those same needs. And the book really stresses the importance of doing this competitive analysis of honestly assessing both your own strengths and weaknesses as a company, but also those of your competitors. It throws out some really interesting examples. Talks about the unmatched distribution network that Frito-Lay has. The way that they can get their products into just about every corner store and gas station in the country.
Right. Or Apple with its incredible track record of successful new product launches. I mean, they seem to have this magic touch when it comes to introducing new products that people just go crazy for.
Yeah, or Geico with its consistently memorable advertising campaigns. The gecko, the caveman. They really figure out how to cut through the clutter and get their message across.
Yeah, and it's not just about those, kind of big picture capabilities. You also need to dig into, where you actually stand in the market. So looking at things like the overall market size, what share of that market do you have?
Mhm.
Your relative market share, your financial health. How have you been performing historically? Your reputation. All of those factors contribute to where you stand competitively.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the book really kind of dives into the resources that you have to play with as a company. So not just your cash reserves, but the talent of your people, the sophistication of your technology, your research and development capabilities, your sales force. How effective are they? How far reaching is your sales force? Your relationships with your suppliers. How strong are those? Your manufacturing efficiency. All of these are assets that you can leverage compared to the competition.
Right. And those resources, they kind of feed into, the next concept that the book introduces, which is barriers to entry. And those are, the obstacles that new companies face when they're trying to get into a particular market.
So like the classic examples are things like needing a lot of capital, a lot of cash just to get started, or needing very specialized knowledge that's not easily acquired.
Yeah.
And the book gives the pharmaceutical industry as an example, right? I mean, to develop a new drug, you need extensive research labs. You need a massive sales force to reach all the doctors who might prescribe it. And then you've got to deal with all the complex regulations. So it's not easy for a small company to just kind of jump into that market.
Right. And that's why you often see, smaller biotech companies with promising discoveries partnering with those big pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
Because they just don't have the resources to go it alone.
Yeah. But in other industries, those barriers to entry can be much lower. So the book is the example of launching a new internet search engine, right? I mean, the technical hurdle there isn't necessarily massive, but then you have companies like Google who are constantly trying to build up their own defenses, through things like massive data collection. They're gathering information about everything we do online,
Right.
and they're using that to make their search results better. But they're also using it to make it harder for anyone to compete with them. Right, and they're integrating their services. So your Gmail account is tied to your search history and your YouTube account and all of that. It makes it harder for people to switch. Yeah, it creates that stickiness, that inertia. And speaking of changing competitive landscapes, the book gives this really quick rundown of social media platforms, right? I mean, remember MySpace, and then Facebook came along, and then Instagram, and now TikTok. I mean, it just shows how quickly things can change.
Right. And how easily a market leader can be dethroned.
Yeah, absolutely. So then the book introduces this concept of market share leverage.
Right. And that's the idea that companies that have a larger market share, they often enjoy higher profit margins. And that's because they can spread their fixed costs over a larger number of units. So they can produce goods or services more efficiently. Smaller players just can't always compete on costs.
Yeah. So the book gives the example of the instant coffee market, which is dominated by a few big players, versus the ground coffee market, which is much more fragmented. And it's much more favorable for new entrants to come into that ground coffee market because they don't have to compete on price in the same way.
Right. They can focus on niche segments or on, higher quality, and they can still be profitable.
Yeah. And to get a really visual understanding of all of this, the book talks about perceptual mapping.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a really clever tool where you basically plot your product and your competitors' products on a graph based on key consumer perception. So the classic example is you have a 2x2 grid with price on one axis and quality on the other.
Right, but you could use any two relevant attributes. So for paper towels, for example, it might be strength versus how decorative they are.
Yeah. And the book gives this great example of Bounty paper towels and how they managed to carve out this really profitable space by being perceived as both strong and having appealing designs. And it really drives home the point that in marketing, just like in politics, often perception is reality.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter what the actual objective reality is. If people perceive your product to be a certain way, then that's what's going to drive their purchasing decisions.
Right. So you really got to understand how consumers perceive your product, and those perceptual maps can be a really useful tool for doing that. They can also help you identify potential gaps in the market. Where are there underserved segments? Where could you potentially launch a new product and be successful?
Yeah. So then the book moves on to talking about some crucial principles of product positioning. So how do you want your target customers to think about your product relative to the competition? And one of the things that it talks about is the advantage of being first, of being the first to define a category.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives the example of Kleenex, right? I mean, Kleenex was the first facial tissue, basically. And to this day, we still call facial tissues Kleenex, even if they're not the Kleenex brand. So they really kind of own that category in people's minds.
Right. And another principle is consistency of messaging, so like Coca-Cola, right? Coke Classic is the real thing. I mean, they've been saying that for decades. And it really helps to solidify their position in the consumer's mind. When you think of Coca-Cola, you think of that classic taste, that authentic experience.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes the smartest way to reach a new customer segment is to actually introduce an entirely new brand.
Mhm.
So the book gives the example of Coke introducing Dasani bottled water. They didn't try to market Coke as a healthy alternative to water. They created this whole new brand that had its own image, its own messaging, and
Yeah.
it was targeted at a different type of consumer.
Right. And then the book also talks about the growing importance of what's called omni-channel marketing. And that's basically ensuring that you have a consistent brand experience across all the different ways that a customer might interact with you. So, whether they're visiting your website or walking into your store or interacting with you on social media, the experience should be seamless.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the book dives into this whole world of distribution channels, and this is where things get a little bit less glamorous maybe, but just as important,
Mhm.
because it's all about how do you actually get your product into the hands of the people who are going to buy it,
Mhm.
and the book highlights this really significant power shift that's occurred, particularly in the grocery industry. It used to be that the big manufacturers held more clout. But as smaller supermarket chains have consolidated into these massive national players, the retailers have realized that they have this incredibly valuable asset, which is their shelf space.
Right. Each stock keeping unit or SKU, it represents valuable real estate.
Right. And so these large retailers, they can often dictate terms to the manufacturers. They can say, hey, if you want to be on our shelves, you got to pay us this much. They can really kind of control the margins, the pricing, the placement of products.
Right. So it really highlights the importance of understanding who controls that access to your end customer.
Yeah. 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 And then the book talks about product differentiation, all the ways that you can make your product stand out from the competition. So features, performance, conformance, how consistently it meets specifications, durability, reliability, repairability, style, design. All of these are levers that you can pull to try to make your product more attractive to consumers.
Right. But the book also cautions against, overextending your brand, getting into areas where it no longer resonates with consumers. You can dilute your brand if you try to be all things to all people.
Yeah, you got to be true to your core identity, and it's interesting how all this circles back to those perceptual maps and your positioning strategy. Um, those are really fundamental tools for figuring out how to differentiate your product and carve out that specific niche in the market that you're going after. And the book really emphasizes that how you position your product is deeply intertwined with the market segment that you've chosen to target based on all that initial consumer and market analysis that we talked about.
Right. It all kind of fits together. And the book also mentions how the very place where a product is sold can impact how it's perceived. So if you're selling a high-end designer dress, exclusively at Neiman Marcus, that sends a very different signal than if you're, mass distributing inexpensive car window sunshades through discount stores.
Well, yeah, yeah. Your distribution strategy has got to be in line with the product's image and the expectations of your target market. So then it's like, okay, how do we actually get the word out? How do we tell people about our product? So we get into this whole discussion of promotion, and there are really four core elements of promotion that the book talks about. First is advertising, that non-personal paid form of communication. We see it everywhere.
Right. And then you have sales promotion, which is all about those, short-term incentives to drive immediate action, things like coupons or limited time offers or contests.
Right, right. Then you have public relations, which is, really about building a positive image for your company or your product.
Mhm.
And a key aspect of that is publicity, which is essentially unpaid media coverage. Getting your company or your product featured in news articles or on TV.
Right. And then finally, there's personal selling, and that's that direct one-on-one interaction with the buyer. And while that's often the most expensive per contact, it can be incredibly effective, especially for introducing new products or complex products or high-value products where that personal touch really matters.
Yeah, yeah, and the book gives this fascinating kind of overview of how personal selling has evolved over time.
Yeah.
For World War I, it was very much this kind of, charismatic music man style of selling, very, very personality driven. Then it moved to this more product focused animated catalog approach where the salesperson was really just kind of, presenting the features and benefits of the product.
Right. And then it was magic formula pitch, which was all about, overcoming objections and closing the sale.
Right. And now it's very much this idea of the salesperson as a problem solver.
Yeah.
Someone who really understands the customer's needs and is selling solutions, not just products.
Right. It's about building relationships, understanding the customer's pain points, and then presenting them with a solution that actually addresses those needs.
Yeah. And then the book also talks about the importance of dealer and employee incentives, sometimes called spiffs.
Yeah.
And that's basically a way to encourage, the sales channel to actively promote your products. Give them a little extra incentive to push your product over the competitions. And then there are, trade shows, which are a great way to connect with wholesalers, dealers, retailers, distributors. And then of course we can't ignore online marketing, which the book identifies as, the largest and still rapidly growing area for direct customer engagement. And that includes things like search engine marketing or SM, where you're basically bidding for visibility on search engine result pages.
Right. And then there's search engine optimization, or SEO, which is all about making your website more organically discoverable. So when people search for keywords that are relevant to your business, your website shows up higher in the search results.
Yeah, yeah. But what's absolutely critical, and this is something that the book really emphasizes, is understanding the economics of your entire plan.
Yeah.
You can have the most creative, the most well-executed marketing mix in the world, but if it doesn't ultimately lead to profitability, then it's back to the drawing board.
Right. If your costs are too high, or the market price you can command is too low, or you need to sell unrealistic volumes to break even, then it's just not going to work. And that might mean that you need to revisit some of your earlier assumptions. Maybe you need to target a different customer segment. Maybe you need to explore different distribution channels.
Yeah, it really underscores that marketing is not a rigid step-by-step process. It's highly iterative. It requires a blend of creativity, real-world experience, analytical skill, a little bit of intuition, and crucially, a very close attention to the financial implications of every decision that you make. And the book does a really good job of summarizing all of these key takeaways. It's also about understanding customer needs, the buying process, the product life cycle, competitive analysis using SWOT, perceptual mapping, even the math behind channel margins. It's really, really quite a comprehensive look at marketing fundamentals.
Yeah, it is. And now, shifting gears a little bit from understanding your market and how to reach it, we move to another really crucial dimension of doing business, which is ethics. And the book starts out by introducing this fundamental concept of social responsibility. The idea that businesses have responsibilities that extend beyond simply maximizing profits for their shareholders. They have obligations to a broader set of stakeholders, which includes, their customers, their suppliers, their employees, the communities in which they operate, and of course, their owners.
Right. And the book highlights the fiduciary duty that corporate leaders have to consider the interests of all of those groups.
Yeah.
And it makes the point that ethical dilemmas, they rarely have a single clear-cut right answer. Different stakeholders can have very different and sometimes conflicting priorities.
Yeah, and they give a classic example of a timber company and the habitat of the spotted owl,
Right.
where you have this clash between economic interests and environmental concerns.
Right, right. And that's where, a framework like stakeholder analysis can be really valuable. It's a way to systematically identify all the parties who might be affected by a company's decisions and to consider their respective interests. And many corporations now, they do these analyses and they publish reports on their corporate social responsibility, their CSR reports.
Right. It's becoming increasingly important for companies to be seen as good corporate citizens and to demonstrate that they're taking those broader stakeholder interests into account.
Yeah, yeah. And then the book delves into the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is commonly known as SOX. And this was enacted in 2002, and it was a direct response to a series of really high-profile corporate scandals. Enron, WorldCom, those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And it was aimed at strengthening ethical conduct and financial accountability
Mm.
in corporate America.
Right. And SOX brought in a whole array of regulations across four main areas. So you have financial accounting rules, which included things like mandating an independent audit committee and requiring the CEO and CFO to personally certify the accuracy of their company's financial statements.
Right. And then you have internal control systems, which are often, based on a framework called COSO. And those are designed to prevent financial fraud, to make it much harder for people to cook the books, so to
Right.
speak.
And then you have ethical conduct rules for certain related parties like lawyers and financial analysts who advise public companies.
Right. And then there are additional listing standards for companies that are trading on the new stock exchange or NASDAQ. So it was a really, really significant piece of legislation. And it was really aimed at boosting investor confidence. After those big scandals, investors were really shaken.
Yeah.
And SOX was meant to restore some of that trust.
Yeah, and the book does a good job of summarizing some of the key ethics takeaways. So, the core concept of the social responsibility of business, the idea of relativism, which the book kind of touches on as a potential justification for avoiding ethical decision making, although it doesn't really go into detail on the various forms of relativism.
Right. But it does make the point that just because something is culturally acceptable in one place or at one time doesn't necessarily make it ethically right.
Right, and then it talks about the practical application of stakeholder analysis, the impact of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and then it touches on this growing importance of what's called ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors, and that's really about evaluating a company's overall responsibility and sustainability.
Yeah. So it's not just about making money. It's about doing so in a way that's responsible, that's sustainable, that's ethical.
Yeah.
Right, and that message is really coming through loud and clear these days.
Absolutely. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the nuts and bolts of tracking all of this, of tracking the financial performance of a business. So we're going to dive into accounting essentials, and the book describes accounting as the fundamental language of business, and I think that's a really apt description.
It is. I mean, at its heart, accounting is about systematically recording a company's economic activities and then communicating that information through a set of standardized financial statements. So primarily the balance sheet, the income statement, and the statement of cash flows.
Right. And the book emphasizes the importance of the accrual basis of accounting.
Right.
And this is a key principle where revenues and expenses are recognized in the period they are earned or incurred, regardless of when the actual cash changes hands.
Yeah.
So it's not just about, when the money comes in or goes out. It's about when the economic activity actually occurs.
Right. And there are two closely related concepts here. One is allocation to accounting periods. And that's basically making sure that revenues and expenses are recorded in the correct time frame.
Yeah, so the book gives a good example here. It says, if IBM sells a computer to Ford on credit in late December, the revenue from that sale is recognized in that year, even if Ford doesn't actually pay the invoice until early the next year.
Right, because the sale occurred in December, so that's when the revenue should be recognized. And
Yeah.
then the second concept is the principle of matching. And that's about making sure that the revenues earned in a specific period are matched with the expenses incurred to generate those revenues in that same period.
Yeah. So the book gives the example of a grocery store like Safeway selling produce in December, but not receiving the bill from the supplier until January. So the cost of that produce is matched with the revenue from its sale in December.
Right. And without those accrual principles, accountants could easily distort a company's financial performance. For example, a company could look artificially profitable by delaying paying its bills until the next accounting period.
Right. So it's really important to understand those principles if you're gonna make sense of financial statements.
Yeah.
Now the fundamental accounting equation is really the foundation of it all.
Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe and check the link in the description to get your Pareto pack, mini guides to learn more from this and all the other books